we didn't know any other homeschool families, and we found out that there were other homeschool families, and I ended up putting together a list of all the families so we could find each other. Remember, there's no internet, no Facebook back then. So I started a support group myself in Williamsburg. And one year, 1988, the Teaching Home magazine had a national homeschool conference. It was like the who's who of homeschooling in 1988. And so we went to that and discovered that they had a state leader conference within that national conference for part of the meetings. We actually, Mike Ferris, we took his place at dinner that night because his flight was delayed coming in. So we got to go to their first meeting. So it kind of opened our eyes to a whole national realm of homeschool and homeschool leadership.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. You can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes as well as upcoming guests and topics, sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoyed the program. Here's your host, Jim Mason.
Hi, I'm Jim Mason, president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and this is another episode of Homeschool Talks, where I get to talk to interesting people in the world of homeschooling. I'm very excited today to welcome Ann Miller. She is the president and executive director of the Home Educators Association of Virginia, HEAV. And in all of the homeschooling land and world, Ann Miller is one of my favorite people as well. We've gotten to be acquainted over the years, and she and Jeff are valuable not only to the homeschooling community, but to my wife, Debbie, and I as well. So welcome, Ann.
Oh, thank you, Jim. And you know I love Debbie.
Yes, it's the only reason that people put up with me, actually, I think.
She's a gem.
Well, I enjoyed Jeff, too. Jeff, he's a very sensible, hardworking guy who reminds me of past life when I was in the building trades myself.
He's my best.
So, Ann, you are the president and executive director of HEAV in Virginia. What does that job entail?
Oh, dear. Well, as the president, I run the board meetings. We work together as a team to set the direction, strategic planning for HEAV. And then as executive director, I run the organization. And we have lots of teams. We work year round with about 60 people, 50 to 60, paid staff and volunteers. And we also do our annual convention, but I am not the convention director. I have a whole team of people who run the organization. And so they do all the work.
So one of the things that I have learned from my data people here is that well over half of HSLDA's, that's my organization's membership, have joined after COVID was pretty much over. And so one of the things that we're always bearing in mind is that a lot of the people that we're communicating with today may not know who we are and why we exist. So who are HEAV and why does it exist?
Well, HEAV is a statewide homeschool association that began in 1983 when there was no homeschool law. And we started on a card table in the General Assembly when there were hearings about homeschool law coming through. And so the founder, Mary Kay Clark, she set up this card table, took down names of people who were there to testify and to listen, and that's how HEAV started. We are here to equip and encourage homeschool families year-round. We do that through phone counseling. We have a whole team of phone counselors who can answer questions. We have very, very active Facebook groups, and we send out newsletters, a magazine. We do our annual convention, which is probably what we're best known for. This year we had over 11,000 people in attendance, and we do that in Richmond every year. We also we have a government affairs team that monitors all 132 school divisions in Virginia. We go over all the agendas. We show up at meetings, and we keep a watch on that because that's where our freedoms are being eroded right now. So we have a lobbyist. We do legislative work. We work with HSLDA together on that often. And with the policy issues that we find in the school board meetings, we're actually working with you all right now on a situation in Prince William County that's a violation of our privacy, of homeschoolers' privacy. So working with Scott Woodruff on that. So we do a lot of things, and we're here really to encourage, equip homeschool families and also to protect homeschool freedoms in Virginia.
So back in 1983, when you were working from a card table, were you around homeschooling back then?
Well, my husband and I, we decided to homeschool in 1980, and we knew one other family in the whole country who was homeschooling, and they were in Massachusetts. So we actually were unaware of any homeschoolers in Virginia until about 1986, I think is when I actually met my first homeschooler. We did learn about HEAV that same year. So, and we became members. We also then learned about HSLDA and we became members. We homeschooled under religious exemption, and we're still members today, even though all of our children are grown and married, and we have soon to be 27 grandchildren.
And, that is a behavior that I like to encourage is, join your state organization wherever you are and join HSLDA wherever you are as well. And I say that, humor with a little bit of humor, but it is really important. The work that you outlined that HEAV does is why we have freedom in Virginia, and that's repeated by state organizations across the country, that active civic involvement is vital. And I mentioned, lots of homeschoolers today have kind of come into homeschooling post-COVID. Do you at HEAV see the same thing that we do, that a lot of homeschoolers just kind of take their freedoms for granted and need to be, educated a little bit?
Yes. I mean, back in the 80s and the 90s, people were still asking, is that legal? And then, of course, and so that question has gone away. The socialization question, I don't know if that's ever going to die, but what about socialization? But yes, we do see that families they just don't necessarily see any need for protection because homeschooling's so free. They have all the options, and of course, the proliferation of curriculum and people giving advice is tremendous. So it just seems like it's always been there. But here in Virginia, though, just this year, we have already dealt with 285 separate incidents with school boards and school division superintendents. And so we have been working to encourage families here in Virginia that freedom is never free, for one thing, and also that it's eternal vigilance, Ronald Reagan, right? That we must, and many others, we always have to be on the lookout to protect our freedoms. And some of the things that we work with the school divisions, they're minor issues, but they're an overreach beyond what the law says. And we're not attorneys at HEAV, although we have an attorney on our board. But we do know what the law says. And so when we work with these school divisions, we're showing them what the law says, but not giving legal advice. That's your department, which is where Scott is helping us right now with Prince William. But we are telling people all the time, we are working to educate people to know that their freedoms are just really one legislative session away. One bad school board decision away, their freedoms could be eroded.
Yeah, so you have an attorney on your board who played a large role in a case that we did here at HSLDA a few years ago, the infamous Sosby case, which is a great example of what you just talked about, where a school board in Virginia, in the Roanoke area, actually this is how I viewed what they did. Dissatisfied with the work of the legislature in adopting a homeschool statute, the local school board decided that more was needed, so they adopted a new policy and added requirements to the Virginia statute, only enforceable in Franklin County. And unfortunately for them, they sent a letter to Kirk Sosby, who was good friends with HSLDA's litigation counsel, Peter Kamakaviva-Ole, when they were both here at Patrick Henry College. And he went on to become an attorney and was practicing in Roanoke. And so he actually kind of knew a little something about the law and sort of objected to that overreach. And the school district, unlike many times in a lot of the situations that you deal with and that our attorney Scott Woodruff deals with, the school district dug in its heels and said, you will follow our local policy or we will prosecute you for truancy, or maybe even call CPS on you for educational neglect for failing to follow our extra legal policy. And so I'm sorry, I'm filibustering here, but
No, it's good. It's real. Yeah.
So Scott Woodruff, Kirk Sosby sent them a polite letter saying, I don't think we have to do this because it's not in the law. And the school district said, oh, yes, you do. And if you don't, we'll prosecute you. So he referred it over to us, and Scott Woodruff wrote another letter, and they didn't back down. So Peter Kamakaviva-Ole, our litigation attorney, sued them. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court of Virginia, which decided 7-0 that the school board was wrong. And so it was an interesting deal because the argument before the Supreme Court of Virginia was actually during COVID. And so it was by conference call. And as Peter was arguing the case, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Virginia clarified with the county's attorney that if they didn't receive the additional information that their local policy required, that they intended to prosecute. And the attorney for the county said something like, well, either that or we'll turn them over to CPS for educational neglect, to which the Chief Justice responded, sounds like a school board in need of paper, not a child in need of services. And at that moment, we sort of breathed a sigh of relief because when the Chief Justice asks a question like that, there's a pretty good chance that he's not buying their argument. And I think the Sosby case is a really important thing to remember in Virginia and other places because the pressure, the freedom, the boundaries of homeschool freedom almost everywhere, a few exceptions, has been moved out, to the kind of the uttermost length that it can reach. And the only direction in many places is to restrict freedom more than it is today. And you exist in Virginia and we around the country to kind of stand fast to protect the freedoms that we have won over all these past 40 plus years. That's the end of my filibuster.
Well, I'll tell you, we use our government affairs team, they use that case all the time as we see school divisions and school boards wanting to put more restrictions that aren't in the law into their policies. And so I could show you a stack of letters that quote that case. That was a real win for Virginia and HSLDA.
And the thing that's really fun about that case is that Kirk and Kristen were both homeschooled growing up. Peter Kamakaviva-Ole was homeschooled growing up, and they knew all of the stories and the history of homeschool freedom in America, really. They're very and they're homeschooling their own kids now too. So
And serving on the State Homeschool Association board. Well, and HSLDA. So we got them both.
that's very exciting. What over the years, what lessons did you learn as a homeschool mom, and how did that translate into you becoming a homeschool activist leader yourself?
Oh boy. That's really two questions. um, uh, as I said earlier, we didn't know any other homeschool families, and we found out that there were other homeschool families, and I ended up putting together a list of all the families so we could find each other. Remember, there's no internet. There's no Facebook back then. And so I started a support group myself in Williamsburg. And one year, 1988, the Teaching Home magazine had a national homeschool conference. It was like the who's who of homeschooling in 1988. And so we went to that and discovered that they had a state leader conference within that national conference. And we were HEAV members, we were HSLDA members. I was a support group leader, so we asked if we could go, and they said sure, and they let us participate in that national leadership group for part of the meetings. We actually, Mike Ferris, we took his place at dinner that night because his flight was delayed coming in. So we got to go to their first meeting. So it kind of opened our eyes to a whole national realm of homeschool and homeschool leadership. The next year, I got my HEAV newsletter, and lo and behold, that leader conference came to Leesburg. And so I called up the editor of the newsletter and I said, oh, we were there last year. We want to go. She called HSLDA and they said, no, that was a mistake. It's not for support group leaders. It's only for state leaders. And I said, oh, my husband and I talked, we called her back. We said, we really, really want to go. Could you ask them again if we could go? And so she did, and it came back no, but she said, you could call them if you want. So we called, and you let us come to that Leesburg National Leadership Conference. And from that, I started going to board meetings, and just to listen, just to observe and listen, just to know what's happening in Virginia. And I'm in a meeting after several months, and I hear someone say, I nominate Ann Miller to be on the advisory board. And I'm like, all in favor say aye. They didn't even ask me. So I was on the advisory board. Then a few months later, I hear I nominate Ann Miller to be on the board, and all of a sudden I'm on the board. Nobody asked me if I wanted to join or anything. And then what was it? 1993, I became vice president, and in 1994, I was elected president. So I didn't intend to be here, but here I am all these years later. And actually, after the first 2 years of president, I said I can't do it anymore. My husband did it. He said nobody wanted to be president. It was not a big honor there. And so he said he would do it. And those 2 years were worse than my first 2 years. Now, remember, I have 8 children. At that point, I didn't have 8 children. I think I only had 6. So he just said, Ann, God didn't call me to do this. He called you to do this. And he made it our family. It was his vision for it to be our family ministry. And to this day, our family loves HEAV. They still volunteer. And they're some of our most generous donors. So, so that's how I got involved.
Well, so that's the transition into leadership. You had 6 children when you became president, and you were homeschooling throughout all of that?
We did.
How did you homeschool. How did you do that?
On a wing and a prayer. And on top of that, my husband had his own construction business, so I also ran the office and the books for that. So it was an interesting time. And when we look back at that time, we don't even know how we did it. But, a lot of moms today do work, and working and homeschooling can go hand in hand. And if I had any advice to offer moms who are on the fence or who are trying to work and homeschool, some things that really worked for me, and I've been in this for the long haul. All my children, my youngest is 28, so it's been a while. But I would say I'm not the most organized person. My daughter, who's getting her PhD at Regent, knows that I have ADHD. But the thing that really helped me, and I think, and the working moms that I know, these are things that helped them too in the many years and the thousands of people I've met, was I learned how to develop routines. Now, if a mom is an organized person, she could call it a schedule. I could never call it a schedule. So it was a routine. And write it down. Figure out what is going to work for your family. And it has to work not only for your child, it has to work for you. You have to figure out, and you have to think outside the box and break outside the industrial model of education that we all grew up in. Well, most of us grew up in, and break outside that box, because we have such freedom in home education that we can learn anytime, anywhere. So it doesn't have to be at a desk all the time or during school hours. I know families who school at night, in the morning, on the weekends. They have family and friends, build a support system. That's critical to have that support system. And get help, be creative. When we were homeschooling, I got help. I got help in different ways, as I had a lot of kids. We had a lot of stuff going on. And so one of the first helps I got, though, was somebody to help clean. And for all you perfectionists out there and right here, nobody's ever going to clean your house as well as you will, but they're going to do it regularly and not maybe once every month or 6 weeks. So you just have to swallow that and get over it. It actually took me a few years, but it was the best thing we ever did. And I've used high school girls and also single people who have like a single owner operator, if you will, who became part of the family. They would become part of the family. But that's critical so that you can have order in your home, especially when you're trying to do school and work at the same time. I got high school girls. College girls are amazing. William and Mary was practically literally in our backyard. And so I got college girls to do Latin drills, to teach math, to do all kinds of things. And so think outside the box. You don't have to provide all the education. It doesn't have to be done and during school hours. And I know we had, and you can motivate your kids too by letting them go to their projects when their schoolwork is done. We had 2 boys who got up at 3 a.m, did all their schoolwork, and went back to bed so that they could get up in the morning and have their school done. So just be creative. And the other thing is to include your children in age appropriately in the decisions about what materials they use, what you're going to study, age appropriate now. But when you include your kids in the decision making and how things are going to work in your homeschool, you get buy-in. And because they take ownership of their own education, which is one of the things that we want. And working in homeschooling, it can help our kids actually step up to the plate and own their education if we let them. That's where that perfectionist thing, you got to let it down and think outside the box.
Having been around homeschooling, both in your own family and in a leadership role for all these years, what have you seen, the biggest changes? I don't know about you, but I sort of break up life now into pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. And it seems like those demarcation lines, I mean, there's real differences. But as you mentioned, homeschooling, we went from phone trees and, mimeographs to Facebook pages and, I guess what there's probably a lot more sophisticated things that people use now that I'm not even familiar with. So what have you seen, as the biggest changes, and throughout that time, what's kind of stayed the same?
Yeah, well, no one's asking if it's legal anymore. That's a big change. That's a huge change.
Yeah, they don't ask if it's legal anymore. Now they call up and say, "Hey, where do I drop off my kids to homeschool?"
We get those calls all the time too.
So the other question we get a lot is, "Oh, you mean there are laws about homeschooling?"
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, with the vast number of homeschool families now, we're not alone anymore. I'll tell you, in the 1980s, we felt very alone. We only knew one family, and then we found this small group out in Charles City County that we didn't even know existed. But everybody knows a homeschooler. There are homeschoolers probably right on your block or around the corner. They're everywhere, and so the groups, the support groups, the co-ops, the hybrids. Really excited about the hybrids. Because they help parents have more confidence. I think it helps parents, it takes some of the burden off their shoulders of we are 100% completely responsible for our kids' education, but it helps share the burden when you have a support team and support families who are like-minded and headed in the same direction. So the growth of homeschool groups and co-ops and pods and all the things, I find that very exciting. The other big change is that now colleges who weren't so sure about homeschoolers are recruiting us, and as is the military, which is that's a huge change right there. That is a huge change.
Well, what do you see as challenges today?
Honestly, too many choices. When we homeschooled, there were probably 5 resources we could reach out to. And now there are thousands and more coming every week. And so how do parents choose what to do? It's overwhelming. And that's a huge challenge. Our organization, and I know HSLDA does too, one of the things we try to do is simplify the process for parents and help them walk them step by step through how we don't tell them what to use, but we give them some metrics on how to make decisions about curriculum. And the thing about this huge proliferation of resources is that parents just need to be ready to know you're going to make a mistake. And guess what? There's somebody, we all do. I remember for kindergarten, I bought the whole first grade curriculum. My daughter was already reading extremely well. And we finished it in like 6 weeks. It was over. It's like, bought the manual. It's like, never do that again. So we all make mistakes. And with those mistakes, with the beauty of homeschooling is if it doesn't work, just toss it. You don't have to don't toss it. Toss it over your shoulder to the line of people behind you who want to try it. So it's not the end of the world. You just have to pick your top 2, maybe 3 that you think might work, and just close your eyes and pick one. And as soon as you start into the curriculum, it'll all unfold. You'll see what works for you, what works for your kid, what doesn't work, and then you can pass it on to the person behind you waiting to buy it. But that is a huge challenge. People get stuck and stymied in what resources to use to educate their children. I also see the challenge that we talked a little bit about already, in that a lot of the new, well, not a lot, most of the new homeschoolers have no idea the battles that were fought to win the freedoms we have and what it takes to keep those freedoms. And I know HSLDA does, and we also we really are trying to educate families to understand how precious those freedoms are and how easily they can be eroded. And so that is another challenge. It depends which side of the aisle you're on this, but another challenge could be taking government funds, which I know is a tender topic for many. The homeschooling and private schools are the only two education options in our country that are relatively free from government control. And we like it that way because we have accountability, but we also have tremendous freedom to be able to teach and train our children in the way that we think they should go. And that is priceless. And so with government funds, ultimately government control will come. And we do see that as one of the challenges.
Are there any particular issues related to kind of the post-COVID exodus from public school that are different from pre-COVID times?
Yeah, I don't segment pre-COVID and post-COVID so much in my mind, so I'm trying to think. I'm not sure. Do you have something in mind?
Well, no, I guess it's in my observation and my belief is that, homeschooling grew pretty steadily for the first, 30 years plus. The legal barriers were kind of moved back and resources became more available. And like you said, it was easier to find other homeschooling families. So these vibrant networks of homeschooling people, at the local level and the state level kind of grew naturally and organically. And then all of a sudden, everybody was forced out of public schools and into homeschooling of one variety or another. And then, public schools reopened. So it seems to me that I hear this more as I go around the country, where lots of people kind of before COVID, it was a big step to take to decide to move out of the public school and into a whole new thing. And people who experienced a taste of having their kids at home during COVID seem to me a little less reluctant now. So they may have returned to the public schools, but today they seem less reluctant to, if I don't like what's going on in my public school, there is this other thing that I've had a taste of that I could do. That it just seems to me like the motivations and the barriers. You don't run into so many people who say, well, I'm glad that's great that you homeschool. I could never do that. I can't imagine being home with my kids all day long, That barrier seems to have gone away. And then the other observation that a friend of mine made is that young parents who didn't have school-age children during COVID, he thinks are more likely to choose homeschooling, seeing so COVID sort of put a spotlight on the public schools in a way that it had never really happened before. So a lot of younger parents are saying, I'm never going to do that. I don't know if you've seen or heard anything like that. These are just sort of anecdotal observations, not statistically significant.
Yeah, well, we definitely have heard from thousands and thousands of families. We have over 90,000 calls in and out from our office around the COVID years. And during COVID, parents actually saw what their children were learning, how the teachers were teaching, and they also learned why Johnny can't read or why Susie can't do math. Well, and so they were Susie can't do math because she doesn't know her math facts. Oh, okay, let's fix that. And Johnny's getting A's, but he can't read anything. I didn't even know that. And we've had so many parents tell us, I was that involved mom. I was there volunteering in the classroom all the time. And I did not realize what my child did not know, because he was getting good report cards. And so parents' eyes were just opened. And then they had to remediate. So they were right there with their kids, nowhere to go. They ended up remediating. They ended up teaching their child to read or teaching them how to do math. And I think they got a taste of like, oh, well, I could do this. It's not as scary, I think, when they realized that they could take that control over their child's education. And also, there were things that they did not want their children to be exposed to. And so they were able to take that in hand as well, and to be able to nurture their children according to their own bent. And I have 6 boys. I cannot even imagine putting boys in front of a computer all day, unless they wanted to play games. Now that would be another thing.
Yeah, then you have to tear them away.
But putting a boy at a desk all day, and there are boys who do like to sit at a desk, but I didn't have any of those boys. And so parents found out that they actually liked their kids. And it took so much stress off them, the kids who were being bullied and who were and had such anxiety going to school every day. They saw their kids become normal and become happy and playful. And so parents saw these things. And while some of them put their children back in when the schools opened, their children went back to all those things. And those parents are more and more taking their kids out and homeschooling. That's what we're finding, because it was not a healthy environment for their children. And they saw the contrast between anxious, bullied, back to being a normal kid, having fun and happy and relaxed, and then back to anxious, feeling bullied again. And so that's a huge change. And I also think with all the groups and the co-ops and the different ways and styles of homeschool support, I think parents are able to find more groups that they're comfortable with, and they feel they have the liberty, like, hey, we could just get together with 5 of our friends, and start a little pod or a little co-op or something. And I think parents feel much more comfortable with that idea as well. And I would say since COVID.
Since you have your finger on the pulse of the school districts in Virginia, how many of those, sort of extra legal demands that you're seeing post-COVID do you think are motivated by kind of this exodus from public schools?
I think a lot of the problems are motivated because the school system is overwhelmed. And monitoring homeschoolers is sort of an unfunded mandate. Monitoring is probably the wrong word. But having to deal with all the notices of intent and all the issues, they're already overwhelmed with the work that they have to do. And so I think a lot of it is just from not knowing. They don't understand the law. They don't know the law. And I don't think it's malice based often. I think they have a lot of turnover in their staff, and they just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, we had 177 incidents of overreach that we intervened in, where we wrote a letter, we told them what the law was. And this year already, we have 285. And it's only August 8th. And so it's just astonishing. And most of the school districts are happy to know, like they want to comply. We have many calling us for help and information like, is this right? Or sending us their forms to review. And we're not attorneys, though. We can only say what the law says. They are losing money, and they're about ready to lose a lot more money. They've lost a lot of students, and they're still losing students. I saw a chart. I don't know, it's been within the last year where they showed the growth of private school was like 6%. Then public school enrollment was down about the same. Do you know the chart I'm talking about? And then homeschool growth was like this. And so they're losing students. And so we are seeing emails and advertisements, if you will, to homeschool families about joining in the virtual Virginia things that they have to offer, or cognitive testing. And so we have seen some of that. There are some privacy issues there too, because they're not allowed to share our information with anyone. I mean, even with the Virginia Department of Education, they can only give them numbers, not contacts, not family names. So, so that is a challenge in them wanting to not lose students and to entice them back.
Well, based on your many years of both homeschooling and in homeschooling leadership, what final words of wisdom would you have for listeners today all across the country? Some maybe just new to homeschooling, or some only considering homeschooling.
Two things. One, think outside the box in educating your children. Don't get stuck in an industrial age model of education. It's all we know, but our education system was designed purposefully to produce docile, compliant workers who literally move at the ring of a bell. It doesn't matter what they're doing. They could be in the middle of a poem or figuring a difficult math problem. And when that bell rings, we've been trained to pack up everything we do and move to the next spot and be told what to do and what to learn. This is the model of our education system. Great book, Underground History of American Education, Dumbing Us Down, Weapons of Mass Instruction, all by John Taylor Gatto. I highly recommend reading any of his books. But so we have to break outside that industrial model. This is the 21st century, and that's not working for today. And we can see that. We can see that in our education issues. So, and then the other thing is, remember or know that we have this incredible opportunity to develop unbelievable relationships with our children. And it's not always easy. I always love when people say, oh, I can never homeschool. I'm not patient enough. And I'm like, yeah, well, you learn to develop patience. I would not say I was patient enough either. But we have this opportunity. And the thing that I know after homeschooling 8 children, oldest is now 42, youngest is 28, and all these grandchildren, is that the only thing we'll have left at the end of educating our children is relationships. And so relationships with your children are the most important thing. I lost the heart of 2 of my children, one for just like months, and the other, it took about 3 years. And I can tell you that when you're not in relationship, when you don't have a relationship, nothing else matters. They could be winning all kinds of awards and go to Harvard. And if you don't have a relationship with them, It's not. And so while we're educating our children, we need to realize that we're in this together, that we want them to have our values. We want them, if you have faith, you want them to have your faith. This is an opportunity to instill all that. And I would encourage relationship over getting the math problems done. Find out what the real issues are, get to the heart of the issues, because it's those heart issues that will ultimately lead to problems. And if you can pursue your child, understand your child, find out their bent, what do they love, what are they equipped for, and do it in relationship, it's all that you'll have left with your child in the end.
I give a talk called the Top 10 Tips for Homeschool Dads. And the first three are relationship, relationship, relationship.
Yes. And dads, affirm your kids. Affirm your kids. Dads affirm. Moms nurture, but dads affirm. And dads are so important in homeschooling. We moms, we have to be careful not to leave the dads out of the process. Yeah. Relationship.
Yeah. And you mentioned, many people choose homeschooling to transmit their faith. HEAV it kind of comes from that world, doesn't it?
Yes. HEAV does operate from a biblical worldview, but we serve all homeschool families. We meet people where they are. We give them the support and the information they need. But we do operate from a biblical worldview.
Yeah, that's the same for HSLDA as well. We come from a Christian biblical worldview, but our Christian worldview teaches that parents have the responsibility to raise and nurture their children, and that's all parents. That's all parents. So we want to help all parents, whether they agree with our worldview or not, because we think all parents have that high duty and obligation to raise their children to become, in my Christian belief, to become, lifelong disciples, as well as good citizens and self-sufficient adults. But as you say, helping all parents without regard to where they are, where they're coming from, is our mission as well.
Yeah, it is ours. On our website, HEAV.org, we have our statement of purpose and philosophy, and we have a list of I believe statements. And we believe that parents are responsible and in control of their child's education, as well as whatever they're also, parents can freely choose whatever means, whether it's schools or, tutors or homeschooling, whatever resources. We believe that parents should be able to make those decisions for their children. And we do look at people as the Lord says to look at people, and to and to love people as He does. He loves all of us. So
yeah, if He can love me
and me.
That's right. So I said we were going to do the final word, but you've raised an interesting thing, and I just wanted to expound on it just a little bit. This worldview difference is really important, and it's important today because of the challenges we face. One worldview says, children are given into families for families to raise and nurture, and the other worldview says the state's in charge of pretty much everything, including family life. And when this is sort of a lame example. I used this once at a state Supreme Court, and then I decided never to use it again. But I've written it a few times in actual legal briefs. From the outside, these two choices may not seem all that different, but it's very much like two snowflakes that fall at the the continental divide. If one snowflake falls 6 inches away from the other, they seem very close, but when they melt, the water from one goes to the Gulf of Mexico and the other goes, to the Pacific. So these things that may not seem that big of a deal have very big eternal consequences. And so HEAV and HSLDA and many of the state homeschool organizations that you and I are familiar with begin from the premise that the Lord created children to be placed in the family, to be raised by loving parents. And that makes a lot of difference. That makes all the difference, really, in outcomes. And the thing we face today, and I think these challenges are going to only get more pronounced, is those who want to put the state back in charge in a bigger way about the ways that the interior workings of family life, and especially homeschooling.
Yeah, it is, because right now we have such freedom to teach and train our children. And I know with my 8 children, everyone is different. They have different learning styles. They have different interests. And because of homeschooling, we were able to encourage their interests, and they had freedom to pursue their interests in a way that if there was more control on how we educated them, we would not have been able to do that.
Well, Anne, it's been a pleasure catching up with you. And this is a delayed podcast interview of about, 10 and a half months. We actually sat down almost a year ago and we weren't able to finish it. But I'm glad that we finally were able to do that. And I would like everybody to, if you live in Virginia, do go to heav.org. I think HEAV is one of the preeminent and best run, organized, useful, helpful homeschool organizations around. And they're very, very helpful to families all over the state. So visit them and join up if you're not already a member. And right after you join HEAV, I'd like you to consider coming to HSLDA.org and join HSLDA as well. HEAV and HSLDA have slightly different missions, and both are important. Whereas HSLDA focuses on legal and policy issues on a national level, and helping homeschooling families who are in or almost in legal jeopardy because of their homeschooling. So do come to hslda.org and join. And if you want to support our mission, you can also donate to our cause. We'd love to have you. So once again, my guest, Ann Miller, is the President and Executive Director of Home Educators Association of Virginia. And I really enjoyed our conversation. So thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Jim. And one thing I want to add is that we do encourage families to join HSLDA. Jeff and I are still HSLDA members because we believe in the work that you do. And we know that when we were homeschooling, we just had peace of mind. As soon as we learned of HSLDA, we joined right away. It does give assurance that there'll be somebody in my corner. And so we do encourage families to join HSLDA.
Well, we thank you for that. And I always like to remember that, homeschooling is a way of raising children. It's a way of educating children, but it's also a movement that is an important institution in our cultural landscape in America today. And by supporting HEAV and HSLDA, you're also supporting this important private institution that, the government doesn't tell us to do any of this, and it's not responding to any state laws that make her, be the, do all of the things and handle 90,000 calls and all that stuff. This is all motivated by a desire to give something to the next generation. And that's what both organizations are really about. So, Ann, thank you for the pitch and the reminder that we're in this together. So once again, I'm Jim Mason, president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and this has been another episode of Homeschool Talks.
Today's program is made possible by HSLDA's legal support team. We know homeschooling isn't always easy. That's why we're committed to giving you peace of mind, so you can focus on giving your kids the best possible education. As an HSLDA member, you have access to customized legal advice from our team of attorneys to help you comply with your state's homeschool law. And will represent you if your right to homeschool is ever challenged, even in court. Every day, we help our members respond to overreaching officials, and we stand ready to defend your homeschool against unlawful attacks. To hear more about how you can enjoy a worry-free homeschool experience, visit hslda.org/join. That's hslda.org/join. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this conversation, will you do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes, as well as upcoming guests and topics, you can sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next time.